Hey, in this YouTube video, I'm going to introduce you to access table relationships, one-to-one, one-to-many, and many-to-many. And basically, I'm just going to take some stuff from SQL queries for mere mortals. You can go to this website here, and you can download and follow along. So basically, here are the download files, and you're just going to open up entertainment, and you just say example. So I'm not really going to go over SQL that much as I'm going to go over like access table relationships and just basic data structure for the different tables. So when you open this up, you just have to like click around and then that'll disappear. So if you open up like the agents table and go to design view, just right click on it and go to design view, you get like the agents table right here. So I mean, SQL is a standard language for communicating with most database systems, and a database is an organized collection of data used for a specific purpose. So here are the tables within Microsoft Access, and the tables are the main structures of a database composed of rows, which are individual records, and fields, which are columns. So basically, each of these are different fields or columns within the database, and here is like the design view. So basically you have like the agent column and the agent first name, agent last name, and each of these, like here's agent first name, agent last name. If you go to view and datasheet view, you have like the individual first names. Each of these are different records, and each of these are different columns. The verticals are columns. So basically you structure the data in a way that you can pull each of the columns with SQL, which you can see in my like Learn SQL in 10 minutes video. So basically, if you right click and go to design view, the way you set up the database is very important because the better you set it up, the easier you can update information. And you'll see by the end of this video why that's useful, because you can basically update the information in one place. And if you have all the databases, if you go to like relationships, you can see like how like the data flows from one table into the different tables. For example, you can have like the customers, and you update the customers, and it flows and it updates all the related information in the engagements table, and you'll see how that actually happens in a little bit, but I'm just going to go back to the basic stuff now. So each of these are the different columns in the design view, and basically each of the columns has a data type which you assign to it. And I review the data types in my Access Missing Manual Part 1 video. But basically, each of the data types are, you have like number, and the number could be any of these different types of numbers. Double and decimal, the largest negative to positive values with the most decimal points, and decimals has the most precision for decimal points. And each of these like you could select many different data types. You could select number, you could select text, and like for the text you could change the amount of size for it, so it could be a certain amount of characters. It could be like a really long name or a really short name, and it can't be any longer than 25 characters. And then you have like date, time, and like currency. And I mean, the most useful one is Autonumber, which I'll show you once I go to a different database. I think this database that this author provided is dumb, because the number here, it doesn't auto increment, and it's not an auto number. But I'll explain why that's useful in a little bit. So basically, every table has a primary key. It must contain a primary key that uniquely identifies its rows, even if it's a linking data table, which I'll go over in a little bit, because you definitely need to be able to have a unique record that identifies the entire row, so that you can pull it if anything happens to the database, so you can retrieve that information and reference it. So every table has a primary key, as denoted by this key up here. If you right click, you can select and add a primary key, and the primary key uniquely identifies the rows. So tables can either be like, when you're building a table, like a table can either be an object, which is like a person, place, or thing with characteristics. So for example, like in the agents table, you have the agent ID, which is the primary key. Then you have like the first name, the last name, and different characteristics about the agent. So when you have like all these related tables, something you have to keep in mind is basically you want to like separate your information, and you don't want to repeat columns. So like for the agents, like obviously you just want all the agents characteristics here, and for the engagements you just want all the engagements characteristics here as all separate columns, and customers you just want all the customers here. And then you can create like tables in between each other that kind of link the different objects together. Like for example, you could have like the agents, and then you could have like the engagements as they have with the different businesses, and then you have like the customers over here. And I mean, yeah, it's you basically just have like a different table for each of the different objects. And tables can represent characteristics such as like age or salary, or they can represent events, so something that occurs at a given point in time, like the distribution of funds or a doctor's appointment. So for like a doctor's appointment, you could have like doctor ID and then like appointment time when you actually show up. So if I go to design view, each column, which is here, these field names are each of the different columns within a table, represents a characteristic of the table. So you don't use spaces in the names for the columns, and you add a prefix if you use the same column name in multiple tables. Say for example, like you have first name for agents and first name for customers and first name for engagements. Later when you're working with SQL, it'd be a little bit easier to write your code and retrieve information if you have like a short abbreviation like AGT for agent for columns that have repetitious names. And you should use a singular name for the column names and then a plural name for the tables, so you can differentiate tables and columns while you're working with SQL. It's a quick way to just keep everything standard when working with all the information, and when you're working on like access table events and stuff. So if a column isn't necessary from a table, you should probably remove it and make a new table with that column. So obviously like you don't want like say if you had like agents, or you had like teachers and classes and students as different tables, you wouldn't want like teacher information on the classes table that doesn't need to be there, because you could actually, you'll later see when I create queries, you can pull information, and when the tables are related, you can pull all the information from the related tables based on the relationship. So there's no reason to have the same like you shouldn't have like teacher name, teacher profession, and all the other columns from like the teacher table like within the classes table, because you could just keep the information separate and relate it, and you'll see how that's useful in a little bit. So I mean, for the column, like you should probably break out the first name, the last name into separate columns, because you want to like retrieve like the first name in certain scenarios, the last name in certain scenarios. You could later concatenate it while working with SQL. So I mean, like when you're working with like addresses or whatever for like the person, you kind of want to break it into city, state, zip code, make it as granular as possible, and you don't want to basically have multiple values in a single column, which is basically like a multi-value column, which is a type of lookup you could do. But you don't want multiple values in a single column. You just want a single value in each column. Like if I right click and gotta go to datasheet view, like you just want a single value in each column that kind of represents that particular column, and that's basically it. Like, and also don't use calculated fields for columns. Like you could create table calculated fields within your queries, but for your tables you shouldn't use calculated fields. And yeah, basically, so a row, this is a row within a table, this is a column, the vertical. The columns would appear on the design view, and you set like the data type, and you could provide like certain like input masks or validation rules. Like, so for the agent ID, you could say like the validation rule, it has to be less than 10, so you can't have any more than 10 agents. So later on when you're updating the database, if somehow someone enters a number that's greater than 10, like, and you have it auto increment up, which you'll see later on, then it'll provide an error and it'll say you can't have more than 10. So you could kind of use that as like a limiting factor. Say if you were managing how many people were in a specific class, or other restrictions, like you could use validation rule. And then like required, you can make it so that the data is required, being that all primary keys have to be unique and they can't be null. You make all the primary keys required and yes. And like for indexed, like you can make something yes for index if you, like, all primary keys should be indexed because you look them up a lot and you relate them to other tables, and the faster you can relate them to other tables, the better. So that's why you would index that in that case. And if you pull the information a lot for queries, it would make sense to index it. But overall, you don't really have to worry about indexes. Indexes is just a quick way. I like recommend you apply indexes to columns that have a lot of unique values and not a lot of like repetitious values, because those are useful, I guess, for like SQL and speeding up the information pulling. And then, I mean, you can provide like default values and like formatting for like the different currencies, but I go over this information a little bit more in my Access Missing Manual Part 1 video, and that's not really important to the tables and the table relationships. So basically, if I go to datasheet view, like save, yes, so every single, like, also in my Access Missing Manual Part 1 video, I show you how to like backup databases, save databases, and I go over all the basics and stuff. But basically, like, each record here, or each row, contains is uniquely identified by a unique value in the primary key column. So the primary key is here, and the primary key can never be like a repeated value. So basically, you got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and it just keeps counting up. And basically, you don't repeat the value whatsoever because this uniquely identifies what this person is. And you could basically insert the primary key into other tables, such as like engagements. You have like the agent ID over here. So the primary key from the agents table, it can repeat multiple times in the engagements table, but it's unique in the agents table. So basically, like the foreign key in a different table. So if I switch to like design view, and like the foreign key, like, so basically like the primary key within like the agents table, which is unique, it can appear in the other table as a foreign key, and that's actually what links the tables together. So if I go to like tables and relationships, basically here's the primary key, is agent ID, and it appears in engagements table, and right here it says 1 because it's like a one to many relationship, and basically like each agent can have many engagements, but each engagement only has a single agent. And yeah, that'll make more sense when I actually create the database in a little bit. But primary key can be made from, like, you could have like 2 primary keys within a table, but basically in Access there's only ever one primary key, which is it's unique and identifies the specific record. And the, like, whenever someone says composite primary key, that basically means that like it has a foreign key, and the foreign key in this case engagements, it's allowed to repeat itself, because like this agent, for example, could have many different engagements, or like a teacher could have many different classes. And say if this was like a classes table, basically a teacher could teach English, he could teach math, he could teach science, and the teacher will appear multiple times on the classes table. And each teacher obviously isn't two people, so it's just a single teacher. And so basically the primary key in each of the tables is required. You need it. It has to be unique, and it will identify each row individually as a unique value. And the primary keys help establish relationships with other tables. And you'll see why that's useful, but basically you can pull information from many different tables with like the different relationships, and while you're making queries, which I also show like all the different types of queries in my Access Missing Manual Part 1 video. So basically the primary keys remain static, they never change, and it's really a non-identifying kind of unique value. And the easiest way to do it is with a Autonumber value type, which is over here. And I'll show you that in a little bit when I actually go over it. But basically, if you go up here and you go to like query design, you can like create like a query that basically works with multiple different tables. So if you don't see this add tables here, you can right click and click show table. So you can make queries based on tables or other queries. And if I add in like the agents, the engagements, and the customers table, like when you're making a query, it remembers the relationship that's defined between the different tables. So this customer ID matches up with this foreign key in the engagements table, customer ID. It's in a one-to-many relationship. And then this agents table, the agent ID matches the agent ID in this engagement table. So this is the second foreign key in the engagements table. And each engagement could have many customers. And each customer is obviously only a single person. And then each engagement number is what the primary key is for engagements. It's the unique value that identifies each of the different engagements. You have engagement 1, engagement 2, engagement 3. And each engagement will just have a single agent and a single customer. So when you're creating a query, like you could, for example, pull like the agent first name, agent last name, and you could have like what engagement it is, and then you could have like the customer first name, the customer last name, and then you could click run. So I actually have one of my tables open right now, so let me just close this table. So basically let me just pin this back. So when you see design, you click run. So basically now I have like, you could like reorder the columns. So now I have like, I did a query and I have like the engagement number, I have all of the agent first name, all the agent last name. So any time that there was an agent and a customer assigned to an engagement, I pulled all that information. And obviously William Thompson, he appears in many different engagements, and he could have many different customers. So basically it's possible for a table to have like a many-to-many relationship, which will make more sense in a little bit too. So basically you can make a linking table between two tables, and each engagement over here can have a single agent and a single customer. But each agent, they could have many customers, and each customer, they could have many agents. So yeah, I'm just going to create a query, and let's see. So I'm going to create another query design, and basically, if you don't see this over here, right click and click Show Table. And I'm going to select Engagements and Agents. So this is in a one-to-many relationship. And I'm going to select agent first name. And I'm going to select the start date for the engagement. And like I'm going to go to click run. So basically this has this is how many records it pulls. It pulls 111 because there are 111 agent IDs within the engagement table that match, and here are all the different start days. So if you go to normally, like, this has like the menu up here, but the way this person designed this database, it like hides everything. So let me just close this out, close this query out, and then go to database tools and pin this again. So if you open up like your agents table and you open up your engagements table, notice how like each there are 9 agents, and then for the engagements there are 111 engagements, and actually it says there are 112 engagements here. So basically it didn't pull this last record. This is the agent ID because there's no agent that is agent 0. So it pulled 111 records out of the 112 because the last agent ID doesn't match. So since this is 0, this agent ID doesn't pull this table, because if you go to database tools and relationships, basically the agents is related to the engagements table by agent ID. And being that this isn't a match over here, this 0, because 0 doesn't appear in agent ID, basically when you create a query and you pull columns from the agents table and columns from the engagements table, it'll only include anything that matches based on the primary key's relationship with the foreign key over here. And yeah, so I'm going to actually like create a database from scratch. But before I create a database from scratch, I'm just going to show you this other database to review what a one-to-many relationship looks like in a database for Microsoft Access. So basically, in this database, I have this table, and I have this table. I have the dolls, and I have the manufacturers. And the manufacturers, as indicated by the plus sign here, is the many and the one-to-many relationship. So if you go to database tools and relationships, you can see the 1 here for manufacturers, and then the infinity sign means many here. So each manufacturer can make many dolls, and each doll can only be made by one manufacturer. So that's the relationship right there. And basically the manufacturers is the 1, so it has the plus. So you can see Hopper Garden makes multiple dolls. It makes Edgar Allan Poe and James Joyce. And Magic Plastic makes Frodo, Yoda, and Tiger Woods as dolls. So each manufacturer can make many dolls, but the dolls table doesn't have a plus because they can only be made by a single manufacturer, as indicated by the manufacturer ID over here. But when you really think about it, these dolls can technically be made by many manufacturers. They shouldn't be limited to one manufacturer. So this manufacturer column is actually, manufacturer ID column is actually an extra column that you don't really need. And I'm going to create a linking table between these two tables, and then they'll be in a many-to-many relationship. So currently there's this existing relationship, which you can right-click and select delete. And first let me close out the tables. Right-click and select delete, and select yes. So that just deleted the relationship between manufacturers and dolls. And if you want to remake that relationship, you could just drag ID to manufacturer ID, and then select create. That makes the, if you click on it again, that makes it one-to-many relationship. and then if you enforce referential integrity, that will make the 1 and the infinity sign appear again. I'll explain what referential integrity is later, but basically, so for now I'm just going to delete this relationship and click yes, and I'm going to open up the dolls table, and I'm actually going to delete manufacturer ID there because that's just an extra column that doesn't really need to be there anymore, because I'm going to have a I'm going to create a new table, which will be the linking table that makes this a many-to-many relationship. So I'm going to go to create table, and I'm going to switch to design view and name it like just like a combination of the two tables, just like manufacturer dolls, and I guess like the primary key will just be like manufacturer doll ID. Doesn't matter. It's an auto number. It's required. Yes. And then the one key I'm gonna make, another column I'm gonna make is gonna be ID, and this will be and the other one is just gonna be ID too. So let me just open up the dolls and the manufacturers table. This is going to be a little bit more disorganized than my next when I create the table from scratch, just to illustrate a point. So basically I'm going to create a column called ID and a column called ID2. ID is going to match the manufacturer's ID table, and it's going to match based on that. And then ID2 is going to match the ID and dolls table. So it's going to have different IDs, and I'm going to do a lookup, which will create an automatic relationship between the tables. So, but I mean the column names are going to have different, like different column names. And I mean, when you normally have a relationship between two tables, you want like the columns to be like, it's bad practice to make the column name for manufacturers just ID, and then the column name for dolls ID. It should be instead manufacturing ID and dolls ID, because it's kind of, then when you have like a table between the two, such as when you're making manufacturer doll, then when you're linking the two tables, you have to use different column names. And I mean, in this case, I could do like manufacturer ID, and then for this one, I could do like doll ID. But I mean, it'd be so much better if it was like the same name. So if I go to manufacturer ID and then I go to lookup wizard and click next, so I'm going to select the manufacturers table, and I'm going to include ID and manufacturer. Press next, next. So hide key column basically hides the ID. So ID will be what we match based on. So this linking table manufacturer dolls will link to the manufacturer based on the ID, but being that we're going to use the manufacturer dolls as the front end for the data entry, it'd be much easier for the person who's selecting to select from the manufacturer instead of from some random ID. So I'm going to hide the key column, and we're going to match based on the key column, and then I'm going to press next and finish. Click yes, and then doll ID 2, basically go to lookup wizard and do the same thing except now with the dolls table. So include ID and the character, and then for this you're going to hide the ID, and you're going to basically just be selecting the characters and click finish. Yes. So now if you go to your datasheet view for this table, now you have the lookup field. So basically you'll select whichever manufacturer and whichever dolls they're doing now, because now all of a sudden this manufacturer can make Homer Simpson, and now this manufacturer can make Homer Simpson. So many manufacturers now can make Homer Simpson, and also like I'll go back to fictional industries, this person, this manufacturer could also make many different dolls. So there's a many-to-many relationship now, and that's kind of how that works. So let me just save this table, and then go back to the relationship. So now if I right click and click show tables and add in that linking table, it already has the relationship between the tables, and obviously ID matches all ID 2 and ID matches manufacturer ID with the lookup. It automatically created a relationship. So if I right click and I select edit relationship and I select enforce referential integrity, that will make the 1 and the infinity sign appear for both of these. So the dolls and the manufacturers are in a many-to-many relationship, and the dolls and this is in a one-to-many relationship. So this is just manufacturer dolls is just the linking table between manufacturers and dolls. And basically why this is useful is you enter new dolls on the dolls table, you enter new manufacturers on the manufacturers table, and then on the manufacturer dolls table you can add in a combination of the two when you need to enter a manufacturer and a doll as a new manufacturer doll partnership, because this is like the manufacturer doll partnership table. And so basically why this is useful is if you right click and go to edit relationship, when you do enforce referential integrity, if I was to delete a it prevents, like, enforce referential integrity, I'll go over that a little bit later. But essentially you can do cascade update and cascade delete related records, and that's useful because you can have the information flow from one source. Like, I mean, you know how I deleted that manufacturer ID column before from the dolls, and then I basically just created this linking table because the manufacturer ID was just sitting over there, and it was just a descriptive column that had nothing to do with dolls. So there's no point for that column to be there, because now I have this linking table between the manufacturers and the dolls, and this linking table just has like manufacturer doll partnerships. So now when I actually create a table from scratch, this concept will make even more sense. But basically initially we had a manufacturer and doll relationship, and it was in a one-to-many relationship. Each manufacturer could make many dolls, but the dolls could only be made with one manufacturer. Now I transformed it into a many-to-many relationship without affecting any of the underlying data. And also if you open up the dolls table and the manufacturers table, now they both have pluses. So you could see, like, if you press the plus on the manufacturers, you can see each of the dolls that the manufacturers make. And if you go on the dolls, you can see which manufacturers make which dolls, because it's in a many-to-many, so they both have pluses now. So now I'm just going to create a database from scratch, and basically you're going to understand this concept even more. So I'm just going to open up Access, blank database, and I'm going to go to my desktop. I'm going to overwrite this, press OK. I'm going to use even more real-world examples so it makes even more sense. So basically you're going to right-click, select Design View, and I'm going to make a pilot table. It's going to be called Pilots. I always make my tables with plurals and my columns with singular, so I could differentiate tables and columns while using SQL and while working with table events later on. So basically, if you watch my other videos, I'll point that out later. So basically for this, it's an Autonumber. So Autonumbers, they auto increment up. You'll see this while I'm actually adding records to this database. Right now we're just creating each of the columns. So this is the first column, pilot ID. The second column is first name, and then the next one is like pilot last name. So it's good to do like a little like a prefix before the name, because you could have like first names of customers and first names of other things. So basically this Autonumber is unique. All primary keys are unique, and they don't have duplicates, and they cannot be null. So it's it has a key here, so if you right click and select primary key, you know that's a primary key. And Autonumber, it'll just always be a unique number, and it doesn't really reference anything. It's just a way of having a unique instance of a record, which will identify all of the data in that particular row or record. And so I'm going to go to save and then just go to datasheet view. So I'm going to enter in data here, and you'll see what the auto number does. And this is the first column we made, pilot ID. That was the auto number, and then this was text, and this was text. So you're just going to enter in a few different pilots right now. And obviously now you can see it just auto incremented pilot ID for John to 2. And now you could do, yeah, so you just entered in like 3 pilots. Like this could be where you enter in like the new pilots that join. So click save and close out. So you create your first table. So now you're going to create another table. Go to design view, and this one is going to be the certifications table. So you got the certifications, and you're just going to call this like certification ID, which will be an auto number, unique, no duplicates, and it won't allow nulls automatically because it's the primary key as it's denoted by this icon here. So you go to certification ID is the first column, and the second column is plain, which will be short text, and then you do certification type as short text. I mean, all these different data types down here, like short text, it has like this is how many characters it could have. If you watch my Access Missing Manual Part 1 video, you can learn more about the different data types. So basically it's numbers, dates, and like the numbers could have different values. Like certain numbers can only go up to certain numbers. The decimal point number has more decimal point precision, and if you want to like limit the amount of data you're intaking, because data management is very important with Access, because you can only have a database up to 2 gigabytes. So you want to limit the amount of characters that fields can hold, because you don't want to hold extra fields if you don't need to. So basically, yeah, now I'm going to switch to datasheet view. If you want to learn about like backing up tables and stuff, you can watch my Access Missing Manual Part 1 video, and how to set up like all the trusted database locations and stuff. So now I'm just going to enter in all the different certifications. You could get certified in like Boeing 727, and let me just expand this column so you can read it, which is a big plane. This would be like small plane. So basically, when you're done entering data, click save and close this out. And basically, anytime you close out a table, you're allowed to close out Access, and it'll actually save all your data as long as you don't have an issue. Then if it doesn't prompt you or anything, that means your Access database is saved as is. So basically, you got certifications and you got the pilots table now. And if you go to your database tools, and you search up your relationships and you add certifications and pilots, it's like, alright, so how exactly do I relate these two tables? So, I mean, the pilots, they can have multiple certifications. You could have a person who flies planes that is certified in small planes and big planes. And then also, if you're a certification, you could be like, I am the small plane certification, and I could be obtained by many different people. So they have a many-to-many relationship. So you have to create a linking table between the two, and basically establish a relationship. So you're going to go to create and table and design view, and just call it like pilot certifications, and you include a primary key for this, and then 2 foreign keys. So this will be called like pilot certification ID, which will be an auto number, and then you just have 2 foreign keys for this table. So it'll be pilot ID, and then it'll be certification ID, and you're going to do 2 lookups like we did before. So because the pilot certifications will be the data entry sheet when you need to enter in a new pilot with a new certification. And then the pilots table will be when you enter in a new pilot, and a certification is when you enter in a new certification. So now you could be certified in medium planes, or now all of a sudden, Joe Schmo joins and now he's a pilot. And then obviously if you need to, now with lookup, it makes it a lot easier because you could search all of the different pilots or all the different certifications and select them as the new entries. And it limits it only to currently existing pilots or certifications. So you go here to Lookup Wizard and then here and search up pilots. So include all of the records and then next. So we're going to hide the key column and it'll just show the first name and last name while you're selecting it. But it's going to match based off of the first column, which is the ID. Click Finish, yes, and do the same thing with the certification ID. So now you select certifications and include all the things. Next, you're going to hide the key column, which is going to match based on the certification ID. And then this will be your selections on the data input menu for pilot certifications table. Press Next and Finish, yes. So basically go to datasheet view, and for the pilots now you could select the pilot's name. Like you could be sitting there at your desk and you could be like, alright, so this pilot got certified in this certification, and then this pilot got certified in this certification, this pilot got certified in this certification, etc. So you have a selection of all the different pilots to select from. So now these are all the different pilot certifications, and you can't add in a value here that doesn't exist currently on the other table. So obviously you don't want that to happen, because what if you add like a pilot on here that doesn't exist on the pilots table, and then you lose track of where all the pilots table is supposed to have all the pilots on it. So let's close this out, and then I'll just add like a new pilot here. Just be like new pilot 2, and I'll click save. Now his last name will just be like last name. So I close that out. So if I open up pilot certifications now it has like the new pilot, and I could give him new certifications, and that was already there because and basically, I mean, for this table, say if I just include a pilot without a certification, that's kind of pointless. So if you go to design view, you could select the certification and switch this to a required field and make it yes. So it won't let you update a record or add a record unless, of course, they both have values. So you could make those both required by just clicking here and selecting yes, and clicking here and selecting yes. And so it said existing violated the rules because this guy over here didn't have a certification, but now he does. So now that you did lookups that matched the two primary keys, you obviously, if you add in this table, there's already a relationship because this pilot ID was a lookup for the primary key in this pilot ID. So this is the foreign key in this table, and this is the primary key in pilots. The primary key in pilot ID and pilot table, so all the pilot IDs are unique because each of the pilots are a single person. And the foreign key in the pilot certifications is allowed to be duplicated. You're allowed to have multiple pilots of the same pilot in pilot certifications. So it's in a one-to-many relationship. If you right-click and select Enforce Referential Integrity, you have to close out your other tables. So right-click and Enforce Referential Integrity. You can see it's in a one-to-many relationship. And then if you open up pilot certifications, obviously Brian appears on here twice because he has two different certifications. So the pilots are a single person, and they are unique, different pilots. Obviously, you can't have the same pilot twice because no person could be two different people, and each of them have a different. Each of them can appear twice on the certifications table if they have multiple certifications. So it's in a one-to-many relationship with pilot certifications. And then also certifications is has a lookup to certification ID and pilot certifications, because pilot certifications is the linking table between certifications and pilots. And if you right click here, it's already in a one-to-many relationship, just like the other one, and you just enforce referential integrity. And obviously I have to close this table out and right click and enforce referential integrity. So certifications is in a many-to-many relationship with pilots, and certifications is in a one-to-many relationship with pilot certifications. Each certification can appear many times on pilot certifications, because each certification can be achieved or received by multiple pilots, and each pilot can also receive multiple certifications. So both of these can appear multiple times on the pilot certifications table, and in fact they do. So Boeing 727 appears multiple times because multiple people can have them, and Brian appears multiple times because he could have multiple certifications. And that's the many-to-many relationship. And basically, what does enforce referential integrity do? So enforce referential integrity, it ensures that you don't change a value in the foreign key data. So make sure you don't change pilot ID. Make sure you don't enter a value in the foreign key of one table if there's not a matching value in the primary key of the related table. So you can't just create a new pilot within pilot certifications without it existing in pilots, which the lookup data type already automatically does, because it only lets you select from the currently existing pilots. So if you were to do if you were to use an action query, which I show you in my my other YouTube video, I show you how to do action queries, which allow you to, if you go to my SQL, Learn SQL in 10 Minutes YouTube video, I show you all the different action queries, and I'm not sure how far into the video. Let me see if I wrote it down anywhere. It's like later on in the video. I know in my Access Missing Manual Part 1 video, you can learn how to create queries. In Access Missing Manual Part 1, you can learn how to create queries at 23-30 seconds, just like normal queries. But if you want to learn how to do action queries, then let me see if I wrote that down anywhere. Yeah, you could do update and delete action queries at 54 minutes in my SQL in 10 minutes Access SQL beginner lesson video. And I mean, yeah, so enforce referential integrity. Like say if I were to do like an update query for the pilot certifications, or I just were to insert information into the pilot certifications table or import information, and it included a pilot ID that doesn't exist in this pilot's, then it won't let me close out the table, and it'll throw an error, and this database won't add the records, because with enforce referential integrity, it ensures that the relationship makes sense, and you're not adding in data into one table that violates the relationship rule and creates extra pilots that don't already exist here. So it basically locks down the system and controls how the information flows into it. And it also, if you right click and select edit relationship and cascade update related fields and cascade delete related records, you could do either of them. You do it on that side, and then you do it on this side too. So basically, you click save. Now with cascade update related records, when I go to relationships, when I go to pilots, if I change this new pilot, if I just make his name like that, and I click save, now when I look at certifications, and like that new pilot's name, it cascade updates already in this field, and also on like the pilot certifications, they're known as new pilot 2 already, so everything's already linked and set up and flowed properly. And then also, say if I wanted to delete a pilot, like this new pilot no longer exists, Cascade deleted records, well, it says you're going to delete one record in this table, and then anything that is associated with the this record in other tables. So you click yes, and that new pilot will no longer appear under pilot certifications. So any certifications associated with that pilot get deleted. Obviously, the certifications themselves don't get deleted, just as in relation to that pilot existing. And then under certifications now, obviously that pilot isn't there anymore. So basically we just deleted that pilot, and any reference of them throughout the entire table just got deleted. So that's why data relationships are very important. And I mean, Autonumbers, if you go to design view, yes, let me just close out this and this. So basically, this is a primary key. Autonumbers are useful because they just count up and they're always unique, and you don't really need to reference them as a particular number. They just help create relationships between the tables, and they're supposed to remain static. You don't update the pilot IDs or anything. They're just a static, unchanging value that exists in the table that helps to uniquely identify the row or the record. So each pilot has their own particular ID, and every time you add a new pilot, it just auto increments up, and it just auto increments up, and basically it ensures that it's a unique value, and you don't have to worry about adding a record that already has the same pilot ID. Because like if you think about it, like if you're adding like millions of records, and then over time, like what if you add like the same record and you violate like a rule? That's why just creating the primary key and ensuring it's unique is useful, and then also making sure that like other fields that you need for definite are required when needed. And I mean, if you watch my access missing manual part 1 video, like about like 5 minutes in, I explain like the different data types. So you have like short text, long text, number, and all this other stuff here calculated. So I mean, I explained that about 5 minutes in my access missing manual part 1 video. And I mean, requiring fields makes it so you're not allowed to just leave the value blank and null is very useful, because if you're doing SQL and you're doing calculations with the fields like sum or average, and then in the SQL, and or you're doing calculated fields or math with the fields, or for example you need like a count, just leaving it null will automatically make the calculation or the count incorrect or null. And I mean, with count star, it counts the number of records, and then with count and then the column name in SQL, it counts the number of records where the column name is not null. So your counts could be thrown off if you're not setting up the data properly. So now that I covered like the data types and all the different relationships, one-to-one, one-to-many, and many-to-many, and how to convert from one-to-many to many-to-many, I mean, the one-to-one relationship, as I said, is only, you basically just take off a column. Like, so say if I go to pilots and design view, if I, for example, had something called like salary here, and I wanted the salary to be like in a separate table that someone didn't have access to, then basically I could create like pilot salary table, and then it'll just be pilot ID and salary, and it'll link to this table based on pilot ID, and there would only be a one-to-one relationship, because I would only have as many pilot IDs as there are pilots, and as many salaries as there are pilots, and it would just be one-to-one, and each pilot couldn't have multiple salaries, and they would just have a single salary, so it would be one-to-one. And it's just basically you take a column off of an already, like a characteristic from an already existing table, and you just move it to a new table just because you want it to be separate and confidential. And one-to-many, I mean, its example is basically if you have I already explained it. So I mean, in part 4 and 5 of my access missing manual video, I review access macros and Visual Basic Code VBA, which you can stack access actions to execute one after the other. Access the Missing Manual Part 4 video at 50 minutes and 30 seconds reviews the usefulness of table events, and at 52 minutes and 10 seconds you can see how I adjust inventory in the products table based on values getting added into another table, order details. All 5 videos of that series go over tables, queries, the types queries, forms, and reports in the video 3, and Visual Basic and macros and table events in video 4 and 5. And I also recommend you watch my SQL video if you want to work on retrieving information from databases and performing other joins and data retrievals. Thanks for watching my video.